"I think you've got the wrong boarding pass, sweetheart," the flight attendant said, her smile tight as she waved me away from the first-class line. 10 minutes later, another woman accused me of stealing her seat, and when I calmly said, "Would you like to speak with the owner of this airline? I can arrange that in 2 seconds," the entire cabin froze. You're about to find out what happens when people assume power wears a certain color and what it costs when they're wrong. Buckle up. This flight's about to take a sharp turn. Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was already a hive of chaos by 6:30 a.m., but Caleb Robinson moved through it with practiced calm. Dressed in a fitted navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, loafers polished to a quiet gleam, he looked every bit the young professional, except he was just 17. His posture straight, his grip firm on a premium leather messenger bag, and a single printed document in his hand. A first-class boarding pass to JFK. He had memorized every part of this routine, not because he had to, but because it gave others fewer excuses to question him. As he approached the first-class priority check-in, he felt it. The stare. A slow, appraising look from the blonde woman 2 places ahead, and then a small, tight smile from the airline staffer behind the desk. Claire Bishop, according to her name tag. It was the kind of smile that looked pasted on for policy, not for politeness. "I think you've got the wrong boarding pass, sweetheart," Claire said as Caleb placed his documents on the counter. Her tone hovered just above dismissive, the word sweetheart, carrying more condescension than care. Caleb didn't flinch. "That's my correct ticket. Caleb Robinson. Flight RA2725 to JFK first class." Claire picked up the boarding pass with 2 fingers, as if it might somehow stain her. Her eyes flicked to his ID, then back to his face. "Huh," she muttered. "One moment." But before she could scan it, a shrill voice sliced through the air. "That's mine." Caleb turned. A white woman in her 40s, Chanel scarf tied perfectly around her neck and a large Louis Vuitton tote on her arm, was pointing directly at him. "That's my boarding pass. He has my ticket." Claire immediately stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you saying he took your ticket?" "I had it in my hand just 5 minutes ago," the woman insisted, voice rising. "I was checking my bag right there and now. He has it." "You think that's a coincidence?" Caleb blinked. "Excuse me? This is my—" "I saw him lingering nearby," the woman added. "He probably snatched it when I wasn't looking. You people know how to be slick." Claire's expression shifted immediately, from neutral suspicion to outright offense, not at the woman's statement, but at Caleb's mere presence. She stepped between them like a referee about to eject someone from the game. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step aside," Claire said sharply. "I can prove this is my ticket," Caleb said, his tone calm but clipped now. "Scan it. Look it up. My name is on the manifest." "We'll do that," Claire replied, voice brittle. "But not while you're standing here making our other guests uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" Caleb repeated, blinking. "She just accused me of stealing." "Yes, and that's something we take very seriously," Claire said without irony. Around them, other travelers began to slow. Eyes turned. Phones hovered in unsure hands. The story was writing itself in real time. Well-dressed black teen, agitated white woman, visibly annoyed airline staff. Claire guided Caleb 2 steps back from the counter, as if proximity was a threat. He didn't resist. "Do you have your ID?" she asked. "I already gave it to you," Caleb said evenly. Claire returned to the counter and picked up the card she had clearly forgotten she'd already examined. She looked at it again, then back at the boarding pass, then at Heather Collins, who stood with arms folded and eyes victorious. "It's a forgery, isn't it?" Heather said. "That's what these kids do now. Photoshop a boarding pass, sneak into places they don't belong." Caleb said nothing. The urge to explain, to correct, to defend, to push back, boiled beneath his calm exterior. But his father's voice played in his mind, the way it always did in moments like these. Never try to outshout ignorance. Outclass it. So Caleb stood still expression unreadable, as Claire walked off to verify with a supervisor. 2 minutes passed, then 5. The line behind them grew. Heather didn't stop talking. "First class has standards," she muttered to no one in particular. "It's not about money, it's about class." Caleb had heard that exact phrase before, sometimes from teachers, once from a country club manager, and now from someone who hadn't once considered that he might just belong here more than she did. Claire returned. Her expression had changed, but only slightly. "Mr. Robinson," she said, her voice lacking any trace of apology, "your documents check out, but I'll ask you to please be mindful of your surroundings. We've had issues with ticket mix-ups lately." Heather scoffed. "I'd like a formal complaint filed. I don't feel safe flying in the same cabin." "You're welcome to speak to the gate agent," Claire offered, ignoring the irony of her statement. Caleb retrieved his documents. "I'll be at the gate," he said quietly. "Please, don't lose the boarding pass again." His words were soft, but they cut. As he walked away, he felt the weight of dozens of stares pressed against his back. Not pity, not sympathy, suspicion, containment. Because even after being cleared, Caleb hadn't won. He had just survived the first blow, and the flight hadn't even started yet. Caleb sat in the boarding lounge, away from the crowd, near a window where the sun was just beginning to pierce through the humid Atlanta haze. He held his phone in one hand but wasn't looking at it. The stares, the whispers, the passive-aggressive smiles from passengers who thought they'd just witnessed something uncomfortable but justified. They all echoed louder than any text notification. He had learned long ago that silence was its own form of resistance, but it wasn't born from strength. It was carved out of pain. His gaze drifted past the tarmac, unfocused now, pulled backward. Years back. He was 8. They were in Houston, visiting family. His mother, Angela, had fallen ill mid-trip. A sudden fever, body aches, trouble breathing. At first, everyone thought it was a passing bug, until she collapsed in the hotel room. Caleb remembered the ambulance, the sharp cold of its AC after the sticky hotel hallway. He remembered clutching her hand all the way to the hospital. Her lips were dry, her eyes tired but calm. "It's just a flu, baby," she had whispered. "We'll be laughing about this tomorrow." They never laughed about it. At the ER intake desk, Frederick, his father, had been firm, focused. "My wife is in distress," he'd said. "She needs immediate attention." The nurse had glanced up briefly. A white woman, early 50s, red lipstick slightly smeared. "She doesn't look that bad," the nurse had replied. Frederick's jaw clenched. "She has a 104 fever and chest tightness. This could be sepsis." The nurse exhaled like a tired teacher dealing with a dramatic student. "You'll have to wait. We've got patients with more acute injuries." Caleb remembered being told to sit down, his mother trying to smile at him, sweat dampening her curls. They waited. 42 minutes. By the time a doctor finally examined her, Angela was slipping in and out of consciousness. Her vitals were crashing. What followed was a flurry of machines, shouted codes, and finally, the sound of silence so loud it made Caleb's chest feel hollow. She died at 3:17 p.m. Cause of death, septic shock from untreated pneumonia. Frederick never yelled, never sued, never appeared on TV or posted about it. But something inside him fractured and reformed. The man who had once flown commercial jets for a mid-tier airline quietly resigned, sold property, cashed out investments, and within 6 months founded Robinson Aviation. No press release, no promises, just a purpose. Caleb never asked his father directly if Angela's death was the reason behind everything. He didn't have to. He had watched his father build an airline from scratch with 2 leased aircraft. Watched him handpick every employee in the early days, prioritizing character over credentials. He had seen the internal codes his father created, how all staff had to undergo not just safety and hospitality training, but bias response scenarios. Subtle things, smart things. The first time Caleb asked to travel alone, his father said no. The second time, He relented, but made Caleb promise 3 things. Dress like you own the plane, speak like you built it, and never raise your voice in public unless someone's life depends on it. So, Caleb learned to armor himself in posture, polish, and patience. But armor didn't make you invincible. He remembered middle school, when a white substitute teacher refused to believe he was in the gifted program, made him retake a test just to be sure. He remembered a security guard tailing him at a luxury store, then turning to his white classmate and asking him if he needed help. He remembered the flight attendant 2 years ago who offered every first-class passenger a welcome drink, except him. Every time it happened, Caleb rehearsed the same internal script. Breathe, don't escalate, document, report later. But today had been different. Today, a stranger had looked him in the face and accused him of theft, without a shred of evidence. Just an instinct, honed by generations of coded prejudice. And the airline staff, Claire, had believed it without pause. What hurt wasn't the accusation. It wasn't even the embarrassment. It was the familiarity of it, the predictability, the rote, mechanical unfairness of the entire exchange. Caleb shifted in his seat, pulling out his tablet. An email from his father sat unread. Subject: Gate 47, surveillance team flagged incident. Are you okay? He didn't respond yet. He glanced around. Heather Collins was seated across the lounge, legs crossed, sipping from a Starbucks cup like she hadn't just tried to brand him a criminal in public. Claire stood beside the boarding gate, whispering with a male co-worker, occasionally casting glances in Caleb's direction. He could make a scene now, demand consequences, post a tweet, leak the footage to the press. But instead, Caleb clicked open his father's private app, RA Command Access. He tapped a single icon. Flag Discrimination Event, Class 1. Immediately, the screen prompted a voice memo. He held the device to his lips. Incident occurred at 6:48 a.m., Atlanta First Class Priority. Check-in, Desk 3. Passenger: Heather Collins falsely accused me of ticket theft. Claire Bishop, airline staff, escalated situation without verifying. Documents were valid. No apology issued. He clicked send, and then he exhaled. Still, no one in the lounge noticed him. To them, he was just another teenager with a screen. But Caleb Robinson knew exactly who he was. And soon, so would they. Boarding began at Gate 47, exactly 15 minutes behind schedule. No official announcement explained the delay, but Caleb knew. His report had been received. Somewhere within the infrastructure of Robinson Aviation, flags were rising. Eyes were watching. Still, Claire Bishop stood tall at the gate, her hair freshly pinned, her smile practiced once more. As first-class boarding was announced, she gestured toward Caleb with a robotic nod. "Enjoy your flight, sir," she said, her tone measured, professional, too late for courtesy. Caleb stepped onto the jet bridge, mind clear, emotions contained beneath his polished exterior. Inside the cabin, a symphony of artificial comfort hummed. Warm lighting, gentle chimes, muted jazz overhead. He found his seat, 2A. Window, first row. He settled in, placed his messenger bag neatly below, then reclined slightly. Outside, ground crews swarmed beneath the rising heat. Inside, calm. Manufactured but steady. Until she arrived. Heather Collins entered with the unmistakable presence of someone used to being accommodated. The flight attendant greeting her seemed unaware of the earlier incident and handed her a sparkling water with lemon. Heather's eyes scanned the cabin and locked onto Caleb. The pause in her stride was subtle, but Caleb saw it. She sat in 2B, right beside him. Of course. She placed her designer tote beneath the seat with a pointed sigh. "What a coincidence," she said quietly, glancing over. "Still here, are we?" Caleb didn't reply. He adjusted his seatbelt. Claire emerged from the galley. She walked the aisle briskly, checking storage bins. offering perfunctory smiles. As she reached row 2, her gaze hardened. "Mr. Robinson," she began, her voice pitched just below public confrontation. "Would you be willing to relocate to another seat? Perhaps in economy? There's an empty exit row with extra space, just for everyone's comfort." Caleb turned his head slowly. "Everyone's?" Claire didn't blink. "There's been some tension this morning. We'd like to ensure a smooth experience for all passengers." Heather chimed in softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Just accept you're not supposed to be here. It'll be easier for everyone." Caleb felt the temperature drop around him, not literally, but viscerally. It was the freeze of judgment, the sudden hush. He could feel the eyes. Row 3 was watching. So was row 1. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the disruption. Claire added, "It's entirely optional, of course." "No," Caleb said. His voice wasn't raised, but it had weight. "This is my seat. I paid for it. I'm not moving." Technically, he hadn't paid, but that didn't matter. The seat was his. Claire hesitated. She wasn't used to being denied, especially not by someone she still hadn't mentally placed in the first-class appropriate box. "I understand," she said finally, masking her displeasure behind a brittle smile. "Would you like anything to drink before takeoff?" Caleb didn't answer. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Heather exhaled dramatically beside him, pulling out a silk eye mask and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. The remaining passengers filled in slowly. A businessman in 3C glanced toward Caleb twice before pretending to focus on his phone. A middle-aged couple in row 1 whispered between themselves, looking back, then forward, then back again. It was the look Caleb knew well. "What's he doing here?" The pilot's voice came on, cheerful and practiced. "Welcome aboard Robinson Aviation Flight 2725 with non-stop service to New York City. Estimated flight time today is 2 hours and 3 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Caleb didn't hear the rest. He was watching Claire disappear behind the curtain into the galley. He wasn't naive. She didn't want him here. Neither did Heather. And judging by the glances, a few others were thinking the same. But what stung was the speed, the effortless way people had formed an opinion. One accusation, one suggestion, one unfamiliar face in a familiar space, and the social equilibrium shifted. He was the outsider in first class, not because of behavior, not because of merit, because of expectations. People expected to see someone like Heather in seat 2B. They didn't expect him in 2A. And that disconnect? That was enough to make them uncomfortable. The irony was sharp. Caleb's family owned this airline. His last name was engraved in the company's foundation. He had attended quarterly meetings, sat through hours of compliance policy reviews, and helped design the very seatbacks they now leaned into. But none of that mattered here. Here, he was just another young black passenger being tolerated in a space people thought he didn't deserve. The plane pushed back from the gate. Safety instructions played. Claire returned with hot towels, gave Heather one, skipped Caleb entirely. He didn't react. When the wheels left the ground, Caleb leaned into his seat back, looked out the window, and let the city fall away beneath them. Let them be uncomfortable, he thought. Let the silence work. He had learned from his father. Silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. Cruising at 36,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting a soft glow over the plush interior of first class. The murmured clicks of seatbelt buckles and the low hum of the engines filled the silence as the plane leveled off. Caleb sat still, hands folded, gaze fixed forward, but his mind was racing, coolly, methodically. Claire had returned to the galley after passing out drinks to everyone except him. Heather was already asleep beside him, eye mask in place, chin tilted up like royalty in repose. From the outside, it might have looked peaceful, but the air around Caleb simmered with silent tension. He reached down, carefully unzipped his leather messenger bag, and pulled out a slim black tablet. It looked ordinary to anyone else, just another teenager killing time with tech. But as soon as he opened the screen and scanned his thumbprint, the interface shifted. RA Command Access. His father had given him clearance a year ago, not to wield, but to learn. "You're not a prince," Frederick had told him. "You're an apprentice to an empire. Know it from the inside out." Caleb navigated to the Internal Systems menu, then to the discrete section labeled In-Flight Compliance Oversight. From there, he tapped into Passenger Incident Log. Active flight RA-2725. Nothing had been logged officially yet. Claire hadn't documented the confrontation, not her refusal to acknowledge his ID at check-in, not her subtle exclusion in the cabin, not even her request to relocate him for comfort. But she would. Caleb tapped a secondary function, Priority Observation Request. The interface prompted a short code. He entered, CRX2VIP. The confirmation was immediate. Field Supervisor notified. Observation Protocol initiated. He closed the tablet, tucked it back into the bag, and leaned back as if nothing had happened. 3 minutes later, the curtain at the front of the cabin parted gently. A different flight attendant stepped through, a younger woman, Asian American, badge reading Naomi. Her eyes scanned the rows quickly, then landed on him. There was a subtle shift in her posture, alert, respectful. She approached with a fresh white cloth over one forearm. "Mr. Robinson," she said quietly, her voice devoid of the stiffness that had coated Claire's words. "I apologize for the earlier oversight. May I offer you a beverage of your choice?" Caleb looked up at her. No performance, no theatrics, just a simple nod. "Ginger ale, please." Naomi inclined her head. "Right away, sir." The man across the aisle in 3C squinted slightly at the interaction. The older couple in row 1 exchanged a glance. It was a small disruption in the social narrative they had formed about Caleb. A moment of dissonance. Why did the new attendant speak to him that way? Moments later, Naomi returned with the drink on a small silver tray. "We'll be serving the meal shortly," she added softly. "Please let me know if you need anything at all." "Thank you," Caleb replied. As she walked away, Heather stirred slightly. The scent of citrus perhaps cutting through her shallow sleep. She peeked out from beneath her eye mask, saw the tray, and frowned. Then she looked up toward the front galley, expecting, perhaps, to see Claire. She didn't. Heather sat up straighter. "Excuse me?" she called across the aisle to Naomi, her voice sharp. "I wasn't offered anything." Naomi turned, poised. "Of course, Ms. Collins. Would you like something now?" Heather blinked at the last name. "You know who I am?" Naomi smiled professionally. "Yes, ma'am. We're aware of all first-class passengers." Heather seemed mollified. But Caleb could tell she wasn't used to being second in any scenario, not even drink service. She gave him a sideways look. Something in her eyes was beginning to question the story she had written about him, but it wasn't enough, not yet. Claire reappeared a few minutes later, parting the galley curtain with a cup of coffee in hand, only to freeze as she saw Naomi placing meal trays down row 1. She approached quickly, pulling Naomi aside near the divider wall, their voices hushed but intense. Caleb couldn't hear what was said, but he didn't need to. Claire's shoulders tightened. Naomi didn't flinch. Whatever Naomi had told her, it wasn't up for debate. Claire glanced toward Caleb. For the first time, her mask slipped, just slightly. Her smile was forced, her movement stiffer than before, but she didn't approach. Instead, she turned sharply and returned to the galley. The passengers around him continued their slow recalibration. The man in 3C now leaned back, eyes darting subtly between Caleb and the front of the plane. The couple in 1A whispered again, but this time the woman's tone carried less judgment and more curiosity. Who is he? That was the seed Caleb had just planted. Let it grow. He sipped his ginger ale slowly, savoring not just the flavor but the subtle shift in atmosphere. A shift no one could quite name yet, but everyone could feel. Naomi returned with his meal, seared salmon over lemon risotto, garnished with roasted asparagus. Heather received hers a minute later. Chicken, slightly overcooked. She noticed the difference. Caleb didn't gloat. He didn't even glance her way. He simply ate. Because power, when real, doesn't announce itself. It lingers. It adjusts the temperature of the room. And the room had changed. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled into a rhythm of muted conversation and soft clinks of silverware on porcelain. The atmosphere remained tense around row 2, but its temperature had undeniably shifted. Caleb Robinson, once the object of side-eyes and suspicion, was now an enigma, quiet, composed, and increasingly noticed. Heather Collins had stopped pretending to sleep. Her gaze flickered from Caleb to Naomi, to the front of the cabin and back again, unease slowly chipping away at her once impervious expression. Caleb, meanwhile, had said almost nothing since takeoff. That silence now screamed louder than any defense could have. Claire Bishop had retreated into the galley, pacing. Something wasn't right. She could feel it. Not just the strange behavior of her new co-attendant Naomi, or the subtle way protocol had shifted mid-air, but something else. A tension in the crew manifest. A disruption in the hierarchy. Her earpiece crackled softly. "Claire, this is Flight Ops HQ." She froze. That voice belonged to her direct supervisor, Damon Keene, Director of Cabin Compliance. He never called mid-flight unless there was a federal violation or a high-level passenger complaint. She pressed the discreet button on her earpiece. "Yes, sir. This is Claire. Confirm you're on RA 2725, en route ATL JFK? Affirmative. Are you familiar with passenger 2A? Claire stiffened. Her eyes flicked toward the curtain. Yes, she replied. Caleb Robinson. There was a minor seating incident at check-in, but it's been handled. Handled poorly, Damon said flatly. Claire swallowed. Sir? We've received 2 incident reports. 1 internal, 1 anonymous. HQ surveillance flagged a Category 1 observation. Do you understand what that means? Claire went pale. Category 1 meant VIP level review, not just a procedural file, but a potential investigation into staff conduct, with outcomes ranging from mandatory retraining to termination. I was unaware of any formal designation, she said carefully. You should have been, Damon replied coldly. Passenger 2A is not just any flyer. He's not a standard VIP. He's on the RA silent tier list. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. Silent tier? Immediate family of executive leadership. Direct line. Her blood turned to ice. His father is Frederick Robinson, Damon said. Founder, majority owner, CEO. That's his son you tried to reassign mid-flight. That's the same young man your check-in report described as potentially disruptive. A report you failed to submit properly, by the way. Claire didn't speak. She couldn't. Damon continued. You're not to approach him again unless instructed. Naomi has been briefed. And Claire, don't attempt to spin this. It's already above you. The line went dead. Claire's hand dropped from her earpiece. She stood motionless in the galley. The drone of the engines now drowned out by the deafening thud of her own pulse. She peeked out through the curtain. Caleb was still seated, relaxed, ginger ale in hand. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't even smiling. That made it worse. It made it surgical. She turned away, breathing shallow, suddenly hyper-aware of every decision she had made since that check-in desk. Every glance, every comment, every micro-expression. This wasn't just a customer service blunder. This was career-ending. Meanwhile, back in 2A, Caleb received a message on his tablet. Acknowledged, call initiated, watch the shift. He didn't need to watch. He could feel it. A few minutes later, Naomi returned, not with another drink, but with a discreet nod. Your father's on the line, she said softly. Caleb raised an eyebrow. That fast? He was watching, Naomi replied. He's patched in. Do you want to step to the cockpit or take it here? Caleb shook his head. Here's fine. She handed him a slim headset with a secure channel. He placed it over his ears, pressed the button, and heard the deep, familiar voice of Frederick Robinson. "Son," it said simply. "Hi, Dad." "You're doing well. I've reviewed everything." Caleb nodded, glancing briefly at Heather, who was watching him with growing discomfort. "You don't need me to step in," Frederick continued. "But I'm here, just say the word." "I know," Caleb said. "Thanks for the backup." Frederick's voice softened. "You're handling this better than most executives I've seen." Caleb smiled faintly. "You trained me." They ended the call, and Caleb removed the headset. Heather couldn't take it anymore. "Was that a phone call?" she asked, voice forced. "Sort of," Caleb replied. "Would you like to talk to the owner of this airline? He's online." Heather blinked. "Excuse me?" "My father," Caleb said casually, "owns 73% of Robinson Aviation. You said I wasn't supposed to be here. I just thought maybe you'd like to share that with him directly." Heather stared at him, mouth slightly open, breath caught. Claire emerged from the galley just in time to hear it. Her legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the divider wall, eyes wide. Her mask was gone now. No more smile, no more condescension. Just raw, dawning horror. Passengers nearby began to murmur. The businessman in 3C leaned in. Someone in row 1 actually gasped. The puzzle had clicked into place. Caleb Robinson wasn't just another black kid in a suit. He was the Robinson. The atmosphere in the cabin transformed in seconds. A buzz of whispered questions surged. "Did he say owner? That kid? No way." Claire stepped forward, lips parted to speak, but Naomi intercepted her, standing firm between them. "Ms. Bishop," Naomi said coolly, "please return to the galley." Claire looked like she might protest, but stopped. She nodded once, stiffly, and disappeared behind the curtain. Caleb exhaled through his nose and looked out the window. The clouds stretched below like quiet mountains, serene and untouched by everything playing out at 36,000 feet. He didn't feel victorious. Not yet. This wasn't about payback. It was about precision. It was about proving, in real time, what his father had always told him. You don't change the system by shouting at it. You change it by being so undeniable, it has to rearrange itself around you. And that was exactly what was happening. It started with a soft ping, barely noticeable above the hum of the engines. Then another. Then a chorus of vibrations and alerts began spreading throughout the first-class cabin like an invisible wave. Row 3's businessman looked at his phone, eyebrows lifting. The couple in row 1 each pulled out their devices at the same time. Even Heather Collins, still processing her public unraveling, picked up her phone, scrolling instinctively as if hoping to ground herself in something familiar. And there it was. A video. Posted by a young woman in 4D, college age, white earbuds in, oversized hoodie and designer sneakers. She hadn't spoken a word the entire flight, but her fingers had been moving non-stop. She'd recorded everything, from the moment Heather accused Caleb of stealing her ticket to Claire's subtle maneuvering to push him toward the back. From Caleb's composed defiance, to Naomi's sudden appearance, to the quiet revelation that made an entire cabin hold its breath. "Would you like to talk to the owner of this airline? He's online." The caption read, "Black teen in first class calmly destroys racist Karen and flight attendant. Turns out, he owns the airline. Hashtag first class while black." By the time the plane crossed into Virginia airspace, the video had already hit 480,000 views. 30 minutes later, 1.2 million. The comments came in a tidal wave. "This is poetry." The silence after that line? Chills. She really said he doesn't belong here? To the owner's son? Claire's career just crash-landed harder than this plane will. That's how you handle racism, with class and a last name that owns the building. Caleb, still seated calmly, began to feel it. A shift in energy. Again. But this time, it didn't come from inside the cabin. It came from everywhere else. His phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Group chat. Future of RA Frederick, Dad. Video's gone nuclear. PR team spinning up. Sit tight. Kendra, Communications VP. We're drafting an official statement. Hold off posting anything personal. Armin, Legal. Already flagged 30+ impersonators. Some fake accounts claiming to be you. Isaiah, RA Security Lead. We've escalated Claire's conduct to Tier 1 review. Recommendation? Suspension pending formal hearing. He didn't respond. Not yet. Heather was still pretending to ignore the sudden rustling of phones and sideways glances, but her knuckles were white around the stem of her wine glass. Claire, nowhere to be seen. Naomi passed down the aisle again, calm as ever. She didn't say a word to Caleb this time, just gave him a knowing nod. It's done. But if there's one thing Caleb had learned from watching his father navigate boardrooms, lawsuits, and media scandals, it's that no narrative is ever safe once it goes public. And true to form, the backlash came just as quickly. By the time they reached New Jersey airspace, a secondary thread began trending. #Rich Kid Drama. A different kind of commenter had entered the chat. So what? He's rich? That doesn't make him immune to security checks. Imagine using your dad's airline like it's your private Uber. This is entitlement. Black or white, money shouldn't let you bypass basic protocol. Another spoiled rich kid acting like the world owes him first class. So, the sting wasn't in the volume of comments, but in their tone. It wasn't outright racism. It was deflection, repackaged judgment, prejudice hiding behind economic rhetoric. It was the same people who had cheered when Heather got embarrassed, now pivoting to criticize Caleb's composure, questioning whether it came from character or privilege. It was subtle, but it was loud. Caleb put his phone face down on the tray table. He inhaled slowly, letting the cabin air, stale, pressurized, predictably sterile, fill his lungs. Then he reached into his bag, pulling out a different device, an encrypted tablet, secure server access only. He opened the internal comms dashboard. The PR team had already uploaded a real-time sentiment analysis report. Positive engagement, 72%, negative framing, 17%, growing, neutral sign, observational, 11%, one line stood out. Narrative pivot risk, from racial injustice to wealth privilege. He tapped out a secure message to the head of PR. Keep statements centered on policy reform, not personal status. Lead with data, end with dignity. Then he added, no mention of my name. Let them argue with the facts. He sent it, and just like that, his silence became strategy again. Heather leaned over slightly, unable to help herself. I assume you've seen the video, she asked, trying to sound casual. I've seen a lot of things, Caleb replied without looking at her. You know, she continued, you didn't have to embarrass everyone. That could have been handled discreetly. Caleb turned his head. No one embarrassed you, he said. You just finally ran into someone who didn't shrink when you raised your voice. Heather opened her mouth to respond, but Naomi suddenly appeared. Mr. Robinson, she said gently, we've received a request from the cockpit. The captain would like to know if you'd prefer to disembark first once we land. Caleb blinked. Why? Media will be present at the gate. Already? Yes, sir. JFK staff said local outlets got wind of the story mid-flight. Heather visibly stiffened. I'll stay seated, Caleb said. Like everyone else. Naomi nodded and stepped away. The plane began its descent. Outside, clouds cleared. The skyline of Manhattan glittered in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the world shifted again. But Caleb remained still. He wasn't running from the spotlight. He just refused to dance in it. The fasten seatbelt sign lit up with a gentle ding, followed by the captain's voice breaking through the speaker system. His tone was calm, but undercut with something sharper, urgency veiled by professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've detected a potential pressure irregularity in one of our forward cabin sensors. As a precaution, we will be diverting to Charlotte Douglas International Airport for inspection. There is no immediate danger, but for your safety, we ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened. "Cabin crew, prepare for descent." The words landed like turbulence themselves. Silence swept through the cabin, broken only by the sudden rustle of bags being zipped shut and phones being gripped a little tighter. Heather Collins immediately straightened in her seat, eyeing the overhead vents as though they might betray some hidden malfunction. Caleb's hands remained still, folded in his lap. He had flown more times than he could count, both commercial and on private flights. He knew the sound of a serious issue. This wasn't panic. This was protocol. Still, it didn't stop the emotional ripple that surged through the cabin. Whispers started. A man across the aisle murmured, "First a racist scene, now a technical failure." His companion muttered back, "Some bad karma flying today." 3 rows back, someone asked, "Didn't that kid say his family owns the airline? What if this is related?" It was faint, but Caleb caught it. The words were absurd, irrational. But anxiety doesn't rely on logic. It feeds on stories, especially the ones people are already half willing to believe. He felt it building. The eyes again. This time not in suspicion, but in subtle accusation. Then came the whisper, low, venomous, unmistakable. Claire, now back in the cabin, stood near the galley, speaking to a colleague. Unaware Caleb could hear her as she passed behind his row. "This wouldn't have happened without the drama," she muttered. His jaw clenched. Naomi, 2 rows away, caught the comment too. She turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second, then returning to neutral, calculating, watching. The plane dipped slightly as it began its descent toward Charlotte. Caleb's mind was calm, but his pulse betrayed the pressure of the moment, not from the mechanical issue, but from the narrative forming in the air around him. He opened his tablet again, quickly navigating to the internal RA operations feed. A system alert confirmed the sensor malfunction. The issue was legitimate, but his screen also displayed something more disturbing. Passenger complaints, live, 6 entries in the last 15 minutes, tags, flight disruption, VIP interference, safety concern. One entry read, "Who lets a teenager call the shots on a plane?" Cabin tension spiked after his confrontation with staff. Unsafe environment. Another, "I paid for first class, not reality TV. Since when do rich kids fly above protocols?" He closed the tablet, took a breath. Heather shifted beside him, her tone falsely concerned. "Is this normal?" she asked. "Sensor issues happen," he said evenly. She waited, as if expecting more, an explanation, a defense. He offered none. The plane banked gently, clouds thickening outside the window. Caleb watched as the world tilted slightly, Charlotte's skyline beginning to emerge between breaks in the clouds. Claire passed by again, slowly this time, as if reconsidering her approach. Her face was paler now, the weight of her earlier whisper still hanging between them like static. But she didn't apologize. Instead, she offered a hollow smile and moved on. Caleb's phone buzzed again. Frederick Robinson. "Update received. Charlotte team en route. You okay?" He typed a short reply. "Fine, but narrative's shifting." Another buzz. This time from Naomi, sent via secure internal crew messaging. "Some passengers think you're pulling strings. Suggest a neutral tone on landing. Don't speak unless addressed. Let presence do the work." He replied with a thumbs up. The captain's voice returned. "We'll be touching down in approximately 8 minutes. Please remain seated. Crew, prepare for landing." As the aircraft descended, the mood shifted from curiosity to concern. Parents held children closer. A businessman across the aisle gripped his laptop like a flotation device. Caleb remained still. What disturbed him most wasn't the mechanical issue. It was how quickly public opinion turned. He'd gone from underdog to symbol to suspect, all in under an hour. The same people who had cheered him on for standing up to prejudice now wondered if he'd used too much power too fast. If maybe he'd broken the rules, even without breaking any. The plane touched down with a heavy thud, bounced once, then steadied. Gasps rippled across the cabin. Applause broke out weakly, a reflexive relief. Caleb didn't clap. He waited. As they taxied toward a remote gate surrounded by flashing emergency vehicles, he caught his own reflection in the window. Calm, composed, unreadable. Exactly as planned. The cabin door opened with a hiss of pressurized air and the sharp metallic click of the jet bridge aligning. A cluster of airline staff waited just outside, too composed to look panicked. But their stiff posture betrayed urgency. Naomi stood near Caleb, giving him a discreet signal to remain seated as the rest of first-class passengers began to disembark. Heather was among the first to rise, adjusting her designer bag with exaggerated poise. She glanced back at Caleb, searching for something, validation maybe or regret, but found only stillness. He didn't move. Passengers filtered into the terminal and were ushered toward a private Skyline Airways lounge reserved for emergency reroutes. Plush seating, soft lighting, and an open bar couldn't quite mask the unease hanging in the air. Whispers flew fast. Was it really a censor issue? Are they trying to keep us away from the press? Why is security here? Inside the lounge, Caleb entered last, accompanied by Naomi. Claire was already there, standing stiffly near a coffee bar, her smile brittle. Heather had taken a prime seat near the center, surrounded by a few frequent flyers she clearly considered allies. And then everything changed. The double doors opened. Frederick Robinson walked in. 6'3", salt and pepper hair perfectly trimmed, suit dark gray and sharply tailored. He moved like someone who had long ago stopped needing to announce himself, because the room always knew. The air shifted, conversations halted. Some passengers stood instinctively, others followed. Even Heather rose to her feet, lips parting slightly, unsure whether to smile or flee. Caleb remained seated. Frederick's eyes scanned the room, calculating and calm. He nodded once to his son, then turned his full attention to the lounge. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying without effort. "I'm Frederick Robinson, CEO and founder of Robinson Aviation. I understand this has been an unusual flight. I appreciate your patience." Polite nods rippled. No one interrupted. "I didn't come here to apologize for a mechanical issue," he continued. "Our aircraft are inspected daily, and when a sensor registers a concern, we land. No questions, no risks." He paused. Let that settle. "I came here," he said, eyes narrowing slightly, "because something far more concerning than a pressure sensor was flagged on this flight." Every head turned. Claire visibly flinched. He continued, "My son, Caleb Robinson, was a first-class passenger on RA-2725. At check-in, he was questioned about his legitimacy. On board, he was denied service. He was asked to move seats, not because of protocol, but because of perception." Claire opened her mouth. Frederick raised a hand gently. "I'm not here for your defense, Ms. Bishop." Claire lowered her gaze. "I've read every report," Frederick said, turning slowly. "And I've reviewed the footage, both security and passenger-sourced. I'm not here to shame anyone, but I am here to expose a system failure, one we built to prevent, and yet here we are." Heather shifted uncomfortably. "I want to tell you a story," Frederick said, now addressing the room. "Not just staff, not just passengers, but everyone. 25 years ago, I was a commercial pilot. I had logged more hours than most of my peers. Clean record, no violations. But I never got promoted to captain. I kept being told I needed more time or that others were more prepared." He let the silence return. "Eventually, one supervisor told me off the record, passengers weren't comfortable with a black pilot. Said it might unsettle traditional clients. So I resigned, and I built an airline where excellence would be the only standard." Caleb watched his father with a steady, burning pride. "And yet," Frederick continued, voice low now, "today, on my airline, my son was treated like an intruder. Not because he broke any rule, but because he didn't look like what some expected of a first-class passenger. He turned to Claire. "Ms. Bishop, I won't yell, I won't shame, but I will say this. Your actions revealed a culture we've failed to eradicate. You didn't just misread a situation, you misrepresented our values." Claire's lip trembled. She nodded once, lips too dry to speak. He turned to Heather. "Ms. Collins, I understand you're connected to one of our investor groups. You accused my son of theft without evidence, then tried to reposition that accusation as concern. That's not discretion, that's manipulation." Heather's face drained of color. She looked around. No allies now, no support, just silence. "I don't believe in cancel culture," Frederick said, "but I believe in accountability. And more importantly, I believe in systems that learn." He faced the room. "That's why, starting today, we'll be launching an external audit of our passenger service training with a focus on unconscious bias. We'll be releasing an annual transparency report on staff conduct incidents, and every senior staff member, myself included, will undergo third-party bias training." The passengers nodded slowly, some out of obligation, others with genuine admiration. "And as for my son," he added, finally turning back to Caleb, "he doesn't need my protection. He proved that already. What he needs, what we all need, is a system that protects itself from becoming the thing we claim to be better than." Caleb stood now, meeting his father's gaze. No hug, no handshake, just understanding. Frederick turned back to the crowd. "Thank you for your time. A replacement aircraft is en route. We'll have everyone home shortly." Then, he stepped aside and sat next to his son, just a father now. The room exhaled as one, but no one forgot what had just been said. Not Claire, not Heather, and certainly not the watching world, just outside those lounge doors. After Frederick's speech, the lounge buzzed with muted energy. Conversations resumed, but softer, more deliberate, like everyone was suddenly aware that their words mattered. Caleb stood near the large panoramic window overlooking the tarmac, sipping a fresh glass of sparkling water. Frederick had returned to a private conference room nearby, meeting with his executive assistant and field operations director. Naomi stood beside Caleb now, arms loosely crossed. "You've got people rethinking their entire personality," she said, only half joking. Caleb gave a small, tired smile. They should have rethought it before boarding. His phone vibrated again, this time with an encrypted message from Armin, Skyline's internal legal counsel. "You might want to see this." Attached was a document, clearly confidential, forwarded from the RA Intelligence Division. Subject: Private Equity Monitoring Report. Belcroft Partners, Belcroft. The name wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was one of the top 5 private equity firms currently circling Skyline's upcoming Series F funding round. They were known for aggressive board seat takeovers, strategic restructuring, and reallocation of leadership assets, code for replacing people at the top with more compliant figures. Caleb scrolled through the document. His pulse slowed. There it was. Name: Heather Collins. Position: Senior Liaison, Belcroft Partners. Relation: daughter of Franklin Collins, CEO, Belcroft. Assignment: undisclosed observation of internal operations at Skyline Aviation Status. Active passenger on RA2725. Caleb's breath caught. She hadn't just been an entitled passenger. She hadn't just assumed the worst. She had come looking for it. Naomi leaned in. "You okay?" Caleb tilted the screen toward her. She scanned it, eyebrows raising. That explains a lot. A second document arrived in his inbox, this time from Internal Culture Review. Internal memo: Claire Bishop, Flight Services Supervisor. Prior employment recommendation submitted by Heather Collins, Q1 2022. Mentorship entry listed under Executive Transition Program via Belcroft Fellowship Arm. It snapped into place. Claire hadn't just been another employee trained poorly. She'd been groomed, inserted, strategically placed within frontline staff, Friendly enough to passengers, but always quietly pushing certain narratives upward. First class being too crowded. Frequent tension with non-traditional flyers. Concerns from longtime clients. Not overt racism. Not enough to get caught, but just enough to tip the culture. And Heather? She was here to finish the job. The incident with Caleb wasn't spontaneous. It was a test. Would the system cave? Would the brand stumble under pressure? If Caleb had lost control, made a scene, raised his voice, Heather could have spun it into a justification for reform. A demand for board oversight. A pitch for leadership review. Instead, she'd been outmaneuvered by silence, by precision, by excellence. Caleb forwarded the files to Frederick with a brief note. Targeted disruption attempt confirmed. Claire equals plant. Heather equals operator. Full details attached. He pocketed the phone. Heather, unaware of her exposure, now sat alone on the leather couch near the coffee station. Her posture was tight. Her phone screen glowed faintly as she furiously typed, likely coordinating damage control. Claire was nowhere to be seen. 10 minutes later, the doors opened again. Frederick re-entered the lounge, this time with 2 Skyline executives behind him and a man in a Navy suit bearing the insignia of a Federal Transportation Oversight Agency. He walked directly to Caleb. "Let's wrap this," he said. Caleb nodded. He followed his father toward the center of the room, where Heather now stood, clearly aware the conversation was about to shift. Frederick addressed her directly. "Ms. Collins," he said smoothly, "would you like to explain why a senior executive from Belcroft Partners failed to disclose her relationship to a funding round target before boarding our flight under false pretenses?" Heather stiffened. "Excuse me. You were assigned to observe our operations," Frederick said, holding up the internal memo. "Instead, you staged an encounter to create conflict, leveraged a known staff contact, and attempted to escalate tension into something actionable. And you did all this while hiding your investor affiliation." The entire lounge froze again. Passengers held their breath. Phones lifted. Again. "This is absurd," Heather said, attempting the calm mask. "I boarded as a private citizen." "And yet," Frederick replied, stepping closer, "your father's name appears on at least 3 internal memos requesting additional board oversight should Skyline experience public relations instability." Heather's mouth opened. Closed. Frederick turned to the federal agent. "You have the files?" The man nodded. "Under review. Possible breach of FTA Code 403. Investor interference in certified carrier operations. We'll be investigating further." Heather finally cracked. "This is retaliation. You're only doing this because your son embarrassed himself and now you're looking for a scapegoat." Frederick didn't raise his voice. "My son didn't embarrass himself. He refused to be humiliated. And now you're discovering the difference between power and influence." He paused, then looked around the room. "To everyone here, this wasn't just about one passenger being mistreated. It was about a system being tested. And I'm proud to say, it passed." Caleb said nothing. He didn't need to. Heather sat back down slowly, the weight of exposure settling onto her like gravity. She wasn't a Karen anymore. She was a cautionary tale. The tension in the Skyline Airways lounge hadn't dissipated. It had only shifted forms. The ambient pressure that once wrapped around Caleb now hovered over Heather like a storm cloud, pulsing with consequence. Her calculated calm was unraveling thread by thread, yet Caleb remained still, quiet, and unreadable. And that silence, that infuriating, controlled silence, was louder than any shouting match could have ever been. Back in the corner, Caleb sat beside his father, tablet in hand. Expression neutral, but eyes sharp. The files had been reviewed, the manipulation exposed, and Heather publicly dismantled without theatrics. But Caleb wasn't interested in retribution. His father had already taught him something more powerful. Leverage wasn't for revenge. Leverage was for change. He tapped open a draft proposal he'd written nearly a year ago, one he'd never shared. Not because it wasn't good, but because the timing hadn't been right. Now, the timing was perfect. He titled it clearly at the top, Project EQUAL. Equity Quantified, Uniting Access and Leadership. Proposal: 100 million Fund to advance racial equity in transportation and investment. He attached a strategic brief. Establish a $100 million venture fund seeded by Skyline Aviation and matched by select investment partners. Fund will exclusively support minority-led enterprises in aviation, logistics, infrastructure, and aerospace tech. All Skyline investment partners, current and future, must publicly disclose their DEI index score, diversity, equity, inclusion, evaluated annually by an independent auditing firm. Minimum diversity standards must be met to qualify for future capital engagements, vendor contracts, or expansion partnerships. The program will be led by a new advisory board made up of underrepresented voices across business, education, and public policy. Caleb didn't write a press release. He wrote policy. Then, without a word, he airdropped the file to his father. Frederick blinked once as his tablet pinged. He opened the document, scanning quickly. After 2 minutes, he turned to his son. "You wrote this?" 11 months ago, Caleb said simply. "I was waiting for a moment like this, something more than optics." Frederick's eyes didn't move from the screen. "This is bold." "It's overdue," Caleb replied. Silence passed between them, thick but not tense. Frederick was a man who rarely looked impressed. But now, something deeper flickered behind his eyes. Admiration, not just for his son's control, but for his vision. Caleb added, "If we want to change the system, Dad, we have to stop fixing problems after they go public. We need to make new rules, ones they can't bypass just by smiling and shaking hands." Frederick closed the file. "Who else has seen this?" he asked. "No one," Caleb said. "But they will." Frederick stood, called over Kendra, the VP of Communications, and handed her the tablet. She read, paused, then looked at Caleb like she was seeing him for the first time. "This is your idea?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "It's not just a good idea," she said slowly. "It's market-defining. This reframes the entire DEI conversation around accountability, not slogans." Caleb shrugged slightly. "Thought that might help." Within 20 minutes, a mini war room had formed in the conference suite adjacent to the lounge. PR, legal, investor relations, and operations leadership gathered around the proposal as if it were a battle plan. Because it was, not one of retribution, but of recalibration. Outside the glass walls, passengers waited quietly, sipping complimentary coffee and waiting for the replacement flight. But inside, something bigger than travel was unfolding. Caleb sat back and watched. He didn't speak much, didn't need to, because now his silence carried not just presence, but policy. Heather sat alone, glancing occasionally toward the glass-enclosed room, but no one looked back. Her fall from silent superiority to complete irrelevance was as swift as it was quiet. Claire had already been escorted off-site by HR investigators. What had started as a whisper of discrimination had now rippled into corporate restructuring, legal inquiries, and a $100 million initiative that would likely redefine the company's legacy. And none of it had come from shouting. It had come from a teenager sitting silently in seat 2A. By evening, the official memo had been prepared. Frederick Robinson stood again, this time flanked by senior staff as passengers gathered for the final announcement before reboarding. "I want to thank you all again for your patience today," he said, projecting calm. "This has been an unusual flight, but one that will shape the future of our company in meaningful ways." He held up the tablet. "My son, Caleb Robinson, has proposed a system-level reform we're proud to adopt. Starting this quarter, Skyline Aviation will require full DEI index disclosure from all investment and strategic partners. We will also establish the Project EQUAL Fund to support minority-led innovation in aviation and beyond." A few passengers clapped. Others just nodded, deeply. Heather didn't move. Frederick concluded, Change doesn't begin when you respond to outrage. It begins when you refuse to accept the old script. He stepped back. Caleb didn't say anything, but the room looked at him like he had. 3 days later, the media room at Skyline Aviation's Manhattan headquarters buzzed with tension and anticipation. Rows of chairs filled with reporters, investors, and analysts. TV crews jockeyed for camera angles, wires trailing like veins across the polished floor. On stage, 2 chairs and a simple black podium waited under a backlit logo. Skyline Aviation, Project EQUAL launch. It was a moment the press had salivated for, especially after the viral video, the mid-flight diversion, and the revelation that a major investor's daughter had attempted to sabotage the company's image from inside a luxury cabin. But what they didn't expect was who would walk onto that stage first. Not Frederick Robinson, not the COO, but Caleb. Dressed in a charcoal blazer, no tie, open-collared white shirt, not trying to look older, not trying to look like his father, just himself, but sharper. He stepped up to the mic, placed a tablet on the podium, and calmly looked out at the crowd. No notes in his hands, just clarity. 3 days ago, he began, I boarded flight RA2725 with a valid first-class ticket. I wore a tailored suit. I brought identification. I followed the rules. A pause. And still, I was told indirectly and directly that I didn't belong. The room hushed. Caleb's voice didn't rise. He didn't perform. He didn't need to. He let the truth land without polish. I wasn't removed. I wasn't harmed. But I was reminded that power doesn't always protect you, and prejudice doesn't always shout. He looked up. What happened next wasn't a press stunt. It wasn't a calculated flex. It was a response rooted in the values my family built this company on: calm, dignity, and accountability. He paused again, scanning the crowd. And that's what this initiative is about. Not punishment, not theatrics, but systems. He tapped his tablet. Behind him, a massive screen lit up with 5 bullet points. The pillars of Project EQUAL, transparent DEI metrics for all partners. A $100 million venture fund for minority-led innovation. Third-party audits of internal bias training. Public annual accountability reports. A rotating advisory board led by young, diverse voices. Some companies issue statements. We issued structure. The audience shifted, not from discomfort, but from realization. This wasn't a reactive PR move. This was governance, in real time. Caleb continued, not everyone likes change, and we've already heard from partners threatening to pull investment. That's their right, but as of this morning, Skyline's brand trust rating has jumped 28 points. Bookings are up 12%, and yes, our application pool for executive internships just tripled. He smiled slightly, just once. We're not shrinking from this moment. We're growing into it. As he stepped back, the applause started small, but grew, steady and sincere. Then Frederick walked onto the stage, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and turned to the mic. My son, he said simply, just laid out the next heir of this company. I couldn't be prouder or more aligned. He let the silence linger, then addressed what everyone had come to hear. As of this morning, he announced, Claire Bishop has been placed under full internal review pending resolution. Heather Collins has resigned from Belcroft Partners, and Belcroft, under direct pressure from multiple stakeholders, has issued a formal apology and accepted Skyline's new partnership conditions. A buzz swept through the reporters. Frederick continued, We've lost 3 investor contracts this week, but we've gained 8 new ones, and more importantly, we've gained trust. He stepped back, joining his son. Together, they faced the cameras, but the real impact was still unfolding elsewhere. Across social media, the announcement sparked a second viral wave, not driven by rage or scandal, but by clarity and reform. Tweets poured in. This kid didn't just survive discrimination. He wrote legislation with it. Project EQUAL is the new bar. Other industries take notes. Skyline didn't just fix the plane. they rewired the airport. Meanwhile, within Belcroft's own headquarters, a storm had erupted. Leaked emails showed internal dissent. Several junior partners threatened to resign if Heather wasn't publicly disavowed. Eventually, the company released a carefully worded statement. Belcroft Partners acknowledges the misconduct of former liaison Heather Collins and accepts Skyline Aviation's DEI framework as part of future collaboration. We remain committed to transparency and inclusive growth. Caleb read the statement on his phone in silence. No gloating, just confirmation. Later that night, he sat alone in the Skyline Executive Lounge, now empty, save for a single cleaning staff member quietly vacuuming in the corner. Frederick entered with 2 drinks, iced tea for Caleb, black coffee for himself. "You sure you're 17?" Frederick said, sitting across from him. "Because that speech didn't come from a teenager." Caleb smiled faintly. "I wasn't speaking as a teenager. I was speaking as someone who's been watching a long time." Frederick raised his cup. "To watching." Caleb tapped his glass gently. "To doing more than watch." The clink echoed, soft and solid. Neither man said much after that. Because this wasn't the end of a scandal. This was the beginning of a shift. And Caleb had just piloted the industry into new airspace. Autumn arrived with a crispness that wrapped Manhattan in a quiet hush. The leaves along Fifth Avenue had turned, the air thinner, more reflective. For Caleb Robinson, the noise of the past few months, the headlines, the hashtags, the heated boardrooms, had begun to fade into something quieter. Not gone, just matured. He stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Skyline Aviation Tower, overlooking the skyline as dusk painted the glass buildings in shades of amber and steel. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a round table was being prepared, one unlike any before. Tonight wasn't just about his company, it was about his country. A week prior, an official envelope had arrived on Skyline Aviation letterhead, bearing a seal he didn't recognize at first. Inside was a formal invitation. On behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Office for Civil Aviation Equity, we are pleased to appoint Mr. Caleb Robinson to the newly formed National Advisory Council on Equality in Aviation. Your leadership, insight, and lived experience are precisely what this moment requires. At 17, Caleb had just been named the youngest government advisor in the history of U.S. aviation policy. When he showed the letter to his father, Frederick simply nodded. "Now they'll have to listen," he said. And they had. Inside the conference room that night, leaders from across the industry gathered. CEOs, regulators, professors, pilots, union representatives. They came not just to hear from Skyline, but from him. From the teenager whose calm on a single flight had cracked open the long bolted doors of aviation culture. When Caleb took his seat at the head of the round table, flanked by 2 assistant secretaries of transportation, no one questioned his youth. They didn't see age, they saw impact. He spoke clearly, not long. He didn't belabor the past. He outlined the next decade of change, what it should look like, who it should include, and how it should be measured. Metrics, mentorships, minority ownership standards, not just buzzwords, frameworks. No applause followed, just agreement. Later that week, in the privacy of his office, Caleb received an envelope. No return address, no corporate logo, just cream-colored linen paper and his name handwritten in blue ink. Inside, a letter from Heather Collins. The handwriting was precise, if hesitant. The tone, a mix of apology and recognition. "I was wrong, not just about you, but about what I thought leadership looked like. You didn't humiliate me. You revealed me. I hope one day I can do something meaningful with that mirror." Caleb read it once, then again. He didn't shred it. He didn't respond with a phone call or email. Instead, he printed an op-ed he'd published in The Atlantic just a week prior and mailed it back to her, nothing else inside the envelope. The title was underlined in red ink. "Systemic change is bigger than personal guilt." He had written it after the Project EQUAL launch in response to countless interview requests asking, "Do you forgive them?" In the article, Caleb had written, "This was never about getting an apology. It was about getting a new standard. We don't build equity by waiting for individuals to feel bad. We build it by making bad systems obsolete." Heather would read that, and that would be enough. 6 months passed. Skyline's profits soared. Not because of gimmicks or PR spin, but because travelers began to trust the name again. Not as a faceless brand, but as a symbol of reform. Claire Bishop was quietly dismissed after a thorough investigation, her settlement sealed by mutual agreement. Belcroft Partners reshuffled its leadership, citing strategic misalignment. Project EQUAL funded 13 minority-led startups in its first quarter, with 3 already in acquisition talks. But Caleb stayed behind the curtain. He declined TV interviews, turned down Forbes covers. Instead, he built a curriculum for high school students interested in aviation equity, partnering with public schools in underserved communities. He made sure their journey to Seat 2A wasn't built on chance. One evening, he and Frederick walked through LaGuardia's private terminal, now renamed the Frederick Robinson Executive Concourse, a quiet tribute from the board. As they passed a group of young students touring the space, one boy tugged on his chaperone's sleeve. "That's him," he whispered. "The kid from the plane." Caleb smiled politely. He kept walking. Frederick glanced at him. "They're going to call you that for a long time." "I know. You okay with that?" Caleb looked out the window as a Skyline aircraft ascended, its tail gleaming silver against the twilight. "I'm not trying to change what they call me," he said. "I'm trying to change what they expect when they say it." Frederick stopped walking, studied his son. "You know," he said slowly, "I spent half my life trying to change this industry, and the other half surviving in it." He reached into his coat pocket and handed Caleb a folded photo. A younger Frederick in his first pilot uniform, standing beside a propeller plane, eyes tired but proud. "I never thought it would be you who finished what I started." Caleb looked at the photo, then back at his father. "I didn't finish it," he said. "I just cleared the runway." Frederick smiled, and then, with a weight that wasn't heavy, but full, he said the words Caleb would carry for the rest of his life. "You didn't just change an airline. You're setting a new sky."